Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, yesterday we had our final developer stream before the start of Season 7 for Diablo 4, which we have already talked about on the channel a fair amount. But after the fact, they also released the full proper patch notes coming for this, so today let's quickly go over them properly. To be specific, these are changes made after the PTR, so these assume that you are already aware of all the preceding changes that were announced, and this is what they've actually done to adjust these afterwards. Starting with Spiritborn, they've changed the rank 5 bonus scaling on the Seeker ultimate up to being a 40% of your vulnerable and critical strike bonuses, up from 30%, which it used to be, and the Harmonious Seeker node as well is being changed to make both of its hits be guaranteed critical hits, rather than only the second one, which it was before, and this does make it at least a little bit more buildable around 2. Then for Barbarian, there were a couple of different core skill buffs, one to the underperformer that is Whirlwind. It was strong at one point, but mostly because of the actual dust devils that it create, not because of Whirlwind's damage itself, so they're trying to fix that at least a little bit here, and they've also buffed the damage of Hammer of the Ancients, which is interesting because Hammer of the Ancients is going to be part of one of the strongest builds that will exist this season, even if it won't be the star of it, which I guess is why they raised the damage of Hammer of the Ancients itself. And then there's also going to be a reduction of the scaling for the bonus effect on rank 5 Iron Maelstrom, which makes sense as that was very beefy on the PTR, but to compensate, they've buffed both of the enhancements for Iron Maelstrom, increasing the crit damage and having you reduce the cooldown whenever you swap weapons, regardless of whether it does damage to enemies or not, which has some potential to create neat playstyles when you're just sort of constantly swapping between weapons even when you're between packs. Then they've also buffed some passives for Barbarian, the most impactful being changes to key passives. Walking Arsenal has not only been numerically buffed, but now you gain the bonuses just for casting a skill with each weapon rather than purely having to damage enemies, which does make this just a lot more viable as you can walk around keeping your buffs up between packs, not having to actually build it up during combat. And then also just a fairly large damage increase to the explosion damage from Gushing Wounds as well. Then they changed some legendary aspects too, mostly just shifting around the scaling of earthquakes, but even with this is looking quite likely to be one of the strongest builds that will exist in the game this season. As for unique items, they actually increased the damage bonus of the new Hammer of the Ancients and Earthquake unique, and they increased the damage for Fields of Crimson too. Past that, just a single paragon change, which is an overall buff as well. Then we have the changes for the Druid, and most of these are very wolf focused again. First up, Lacerate's rank 5 bonus has had the crit damage scaling reduced from 40% to 30%, which is unfortunate, but you can now cancel the skill while active once more. As well, the poisoning damage from Raging Shred has been absolutely juiced up. They really want that to be much more potent than it was before. For passives, Toxic Claws, which is one of the most prevalent long-term passives for Druid, has been changed very notably, no longer requiring critical strikes and now just applying bonus poison damage off of any damage that you do with either Lacerate or Shred as a skill. They are really trying to build this poison werewolf concept out further and make it worth playing. Bad Omen as a passive has also had the lightning bolt damage increase as well, and as for legendary aspects, Runeworker's Conduit has had the scaling of lightning bolt damage with willpower reduced, which is fair enough, really, it was quite strong, and Aspect of the Blurred Beast no longer functions on distance traveled, which it did on the PTR, instead now just having a 33% chance to land a bonus strike, repeating up to 4 times if successful. So based on RNG, you'll hit 1 time, 5 times, or anywhere in between that. As for uniques, the Dolmen Stone now tells you how many boulders are active and lets you move while casting boulder, which is nice quality of life too. And Malefic Crescent increases the Lupine Ferocity crit bonus even more than it did on the PTR. That's it for Druid. Moving on to Necromancer, Bone Spear has had some changes to its enhancements. Now Enhanced Bone Spear makes enemies vulnerable instead of Supernatural Bone Spear, and Supernatural Bone Spear just gives you more overpowered damage in general, as well as giving you 5% of your maximum life whenever you overpower with the skill. Bone Spear is looking quite nasty this season in general, and this just makes it even better than it was already looking. Army of the Dead has had its scaling bonus reduced by half, which is quite notable. Bloodwave has had its damage scaling at rank 5 reduced by half as well. Both of these were looking incredibly insane on the PTR, so this is a reasonable reaction, I think, though it remains to be seen just how strong they'll be regardless. Bone Storm's rank 5 bonus scaling from critical strike damage has also been reduced from 40% to 30%, and Supreme Bone Storm also increases attack speed now too, which is a very usable bonus. Aside from that, for legendaries and uniques, the Bone Duster's legendary aspect no longer guarantees crits, but instead guarantees overpowers on enemies inside a bone prison, and gives you bonus damage against them too. This seems to me like a very major buff. Guaranteed overpowers are incredibly good, and it should be interesting to see how this results for sure. Deathless Visage has had some numerical buffs onto it as well, and Lidless Wall will make the additional Bone Storms spawn closer, so they overlap better, and also has an increase to the critical damage that you get for each active Bone Storm too. Then we have changes for Rogues. For skills, they increased the Pierce chance for Dance of Knives from the enhancement, they've increased the Supreme Death Trap bonus damage to unstoppable enemies, and then they just gave some basic function buffs to Shadow Step, increasing cleave area with the temper, but also increasing its just general use radius and making it easier to hit multiple enemies. They also just nerfed the Rain of Arrows rank 5 bonus that was scaling extremely hard on the PTR. They do expect this to still be one of the better rogue builds that will exist on the live game. It just was going a little bit too hard on the PTR for what they'd like. For legendaries and uniques then, the aspect of Star Shards and aspect of Bitter Infection got pretty big numerical buffs, both of them. The Slice and Dice aspect now increases the cleave area on Twisting Blades, as well as giving it the same radius improvements as Shadow Step got with this aspect too. Then Assassin's Strike, as a unique, now gives increased mobility skill ranks from what it did before, and increased Shadow Imbuement ranks from what it did on the PTR as well. Then the final class that got changes is Sorcerer, which actually had more changes than anyone else really. Ice Shards got a damage increase to frozen enemies, which is great. Mystical Frost Nova now also increases your damage against enemies with a duration buff as well, and Shimmering Frost Nova now instantly gives the full dodge chance when using the skill, and restores 10% of your missing mana for each enemy hit. Not maximum mana, missing mana, which is a fun specific interaction there too. They also added that hitting a boss with Frost Nova with this enchantment selected also instantly restores your full mana, which is pretty good too. Invoked Ice Blades now also gives the player attack speed, not just the actual Ice Blades. Deep Freeze will now do the bonus damage pop no matter how the skill ends, and the rank 5 damage scaling bonus has been reduced from 40% down to 30%. As well, Supreme Deep Freeze applies vulnerable when activated now, as well as increasing all frost skill damage after the ultimate ends for a few seconds afterwards. Inferno also got a change to its rank 5 scaling bonus, which now continually makes enemies vulnerable for 5 seconds rather than the vulnerability falling off instantly when the effect ended. Then there's also changes for passives. Permafrost now just increases all damage you do by 6% in general if you have even one frost skill on your action bar, as opposed to only increasing frost skill damage specifically and only to elites. So this is way more generally applicable now. Elemental Synergies now has its bonus doubled if all skills are the same element, which is interesting for sure, and then Inner Flames got a number buff to it too. Esu's Ferocity got a damage boost, and Enlightenment to set the charges per cast reduced by right around half. There were also changes to enchantments, with Firebolt only triggering off of burning damage now, but also giving you a free Firebolt fired off whenever the effect procs. Aside from that, Spark just got an increased chance to form crackling energy. As for aspects and uniques then, Splintering Energy's bonus aspect effect now actually scales from 60 up to 100% depending on the actual roll that you get, rather than being a guaranteed 100%. Frozen Memories gives you a bunch of bonus damage to vulnerable enemies with the Avalanche key passive effect, and then the aspect of Engulfing Flames and Encased aspect got sizable numbers increases as well. The new Strike of Stormhorn Ball Lightning unique now also increases the bonus damage of the super ball lightnings that it can proc even further, and this was actually bugged on the PTR even before this change, so this will be interesting to see properly on live servers. Then Sorcerer also got some paragon changes too, specifically some general buffs to the Tactician, Adept, and Electrocute glyph, some numerical buffs for Static Surge, Fundamental Release, and Enchantment Master as well, and then Searing Heat now applies its bonus damage to all skills, which is pretty great, though the crit chance bonus is still only for pyromancy skills, and then Icefall no longer requires vulnerable enemies for its bonus to trigger, and applies double of the effect permanently against bosses, which is a very solid change too. Outside of that, they changed both new legendary aspects that apply to all classes generally as well. The aspect of Apogeic Fur got increased effectiveness, but the Vehement Brawler's aspect to set the ultimate skill rank bonuses it can give you reduced from 4 down to 2, which is a bit of a shame. Outside of this, they rebalanced a bunch of Witchcraft powers as well based on feedback too. For those who are interested in changes since the PTR, it's mostly buffs to the lesser used ones, some more significant than others. That said, they did nerf the Fortified Generation from Hex of Whispers. As for Occult Gems, they changed the Elder Sigil's Incarnate Tag to Potency. They reduced the power of the Phantom Sting Overpower damage boost, which was the biggest outlier really among these, as overpower builds were already pretty ridiculous on the PTR. And then they also lightly buffed or nerfed a number of other Occult Gems too, with the biggest potential change being Witching Hour having its timer reduced to 1 second, which means it makes core skills count as Eldritch Witchcraft once per second rather than once per 5 seconds, which could have some very interesting implications as a result. That pretty much does it then, outside of bug fixes then everyone, as an in-depth breakdown of the actual final set of patch notes before Season 7 hits, wrapping up the changes that have been made since the PTR happened in early December. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and let me know your own thoughts on any of this and the changes in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.